Okay, hi everyone. We're back for another Marine Women's Initiative Team podcast, and today we're talking with Commander Morgan Holden, as well as Commander Patty Tutulo. Did I say it right, Patty?
Tutelo.
Tutelo, sorry. Okay. And both of our fellow sisters in arms over at the Coast Guard, and we're going to talk about some of the initiatives that they have going on, that they've helped lead, and then some of just even the programs that they've helped to enact to get more diverse and inclusive force. Just as a reminder to everyone, the views expressed are those of this team, and it's really just opinions. We're having a discussion about topics that are of interest to female Marines and other female service members, and they do not reflect official party or policy endorsement by the Marine Corps, by the Department of the Navy, the Department of Defense, the US government, the Coast Guard, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to introduce our two guests here. Commander Morgan Holden, she's an active duty Coast Guard commander with specialties in afloat operations as a cutterman with 8+ years of sea time and as an operations research and data analyst during her staff assignments. She is currently assigned at Coast Guard headquarters and lives in Northern Virginia with her husband, also active duty, and her 3 young children. And then Commander Patty Tutelo, okay, got it, is a retired Coast Guard commander. She's a former gender policy advisor who oversaw the women's retention study and holistic analysis conducted by RAND Corporation to gain a better understanding of why women leave the Coast Guard, which led to many policy changes. She is a holistic counselor, Reiki master, and owner of Whole Authentic You, where she consults with organizations on women's issues and leads women's circles. She lives with her husband, 2 kids, and dog in Northern Virginia. So ladies, welcome. And so I'd like to just get started on a couple topics here because we had a chance to chat about 2 weeks ago and talk about some of the initiatives that y'all have going on, but let's talk a little bit about how we first linked up. So Morgan, you saw or heard about a little bit of the work that we're doing with body composition standards, and that's how we started. So maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Sure. We in the Coast Guard have another Facebook group similar to the one that you have that is for women in the Coast Guard. And on there, one of the Coast Guard members that is part of SSLA, which I think you are, had posted one of your older podcasts that was you talking with Carrie about the body composition work that she had done for her research at Naval Postgrad School. After that, and it was, with body composition, I had reached out to our Coast Guard member saying, I've got to get in touch with these women. They are doing work that we are doing in the Coast Guard. And I felt like, we need to share data and we need to be able to just to express these opinions and viewpoints together, because like the concerns that we're having, that many women in the Coast Guard are having, are surely felt in the other services, and I've seen that on a few pages. And so I just wanted to see if we could touch bases and share data if we need to, share opinions, and see if we can move forward together.
Yeah. So what's so interesting is I think oftentimes women, we think that we're the only ones that are going through something, and we're thinking, or maybe it just only affects me, and we might share it with just 1 or 2 people. But then once we start talking to a few other folks, we're like, oh my gosh, this is really like, this is kind of gangbusters here. I mean, so many other women, it affects so many other women. And I think we're starting to see that. And this opportunity during COVID is allowing us to be more virtual and to touch base with so many other women and connect and talk about these really important issues, because ultimately they're not women's issues. They are national security issues, and they are critical to our ability to fight and be ready. So I'm loving the fact that we've now crossed over into all the other services. You wanted to talk a little bit about maybe your body. Could you talk a little bit about your body composition, maybe some of the data that you all found, because it is interesting.
Oh, sure. And I'll preface it with saying that we entered into looking into the body composition work because of the women's retention study that Patty led through the Coast Guard, and how, in your intro, she said, or you mentioned, there were so many policy changes that came out of that. And one of them was looking at body composition. So the women's retention study is fantastic. And I'll let Patty touch on that
Yeah.
right after we answer this question. But in the data that we've looked at so far with the Coast Guard, we've had, the concern was that there's disproportionality between the genders in mostly the taping standards, but basically like how women and men can get through, can meet compliance with body composition requirements. And after the women's retention study showed that we had a little bit of concern of data integrity there, and then two, let's look and see what the concerns are. The Coast Guard decided to really move forward and tackle this just head on. And so they introduced a pilot program that is for public knowledge. It's out in internet releasable messages. But they introduced a pilot program where they were going to look at some of the other ways that we could evaluate body composition. So they had a big pilot team together, and the overall concept for the pilot program was to introduce abdominal circumference and see if measuring through the 2-3 type taping, or I think what you call it,
the rope and choke.
Rope and choke. Yeah. And so we call it like the 2-3 side taping, 2 for men and 3 for women, or just the abdominal circumference would show proportionality between the genders. And then another possibility is the PFT. And so off of our first data knowledge in October of 2019, that data set, we were able to show that that the AC is proportional for genders. So that's the
abdominal circumference.
Yes, the abdominal circumference, right. So that's a good way moving forward. Another proportional result was that you could do either of the two. So you could do either 2-3 taping or AC, and you could choose one. And if you failed one, you could choose the other. And coming out of that was still proportional. So, because sometimes there's an argument that men are the 2-3 site taping is better for the men to meet standards, and we didn't want to improve policy for one while making it harder for the other.
Sure.
So the pilot program is ongoing. There's no decisions that have been made yet or that are final, but right now the data is showing really good results in that AC or the 2-3 taping is really proportional for both genders. And that's an improvement over where we were.
Yeah, because the improvement was from, what was the ridiculous calculation, or what was the ridiculous number of how it disproportionately impacted women?
It was somewhere around women were getting kicked out. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Women were getting discharged somewhere around 300% more likely than men were for weight, for body composition requirement.
Yeah. And if it's it sounds as if it's the same exact tape measure. So it's the, as we've talked on the previous podcast about the abdominals, the butt, and then the neck. You're subtracting the neck. And so we found, the data that the University of Pittsburgh's data was able to expose was, that 72% of the marine sample, the female marine sample, was found to be overpredicted in body fat. So the fact that you all are finding 300% impacting women, that's ridiculous. Yeah. So obviously there's got to be something that's going to change, and we'll talk about that in our upcoming podcast too. But that's really how this discussion and this relationship started. And then we started talking about the women's retention survey. So Patty, I'd like to turn it over to you now and talk a little bit about what your role was, and if you could talk about what that study really looked at and some of the key findings.
Yeah, so it was amazing. But I first want to start, before I get into the RAND study portion, is how we arrived at that study. So when I first arrived as gender policy advisor, I was approached by 4 students who were going to George Washington University, and they wanted to do their capstone project on women's retention in the Coast Guard. And they were, 3 of them were in the Coast Guard on active duty. So they were really the catalyst, I think, to get everybody intrigued about women's retention. And it was through their findings in their study. So, so from there, we took their study and we briefed it to a lot of people, all the way up to the commandant level. And from there, everybody became curious and said, wow, we have some data to back these things that we had just thought of as one-offs or something like that. So from there, we advocated, and Kristen Jekyll's on the line, and she was the assistant gender policy advisor. She and I worked to advocate for a more robust, I don't want to say professional study, but more, one that conducted by somebody reputable like Rand Corporation. So what we did was we came up with the specs of this study, and we got the money. And it was nearly $1 million study. And in Coast Guard dollars, that's a lot of money. We're a very small service, and we don't get DoD funding like the other services. So we fight with everybody in Department of Homeland Security for money, which isn't a lot. So long story short, we conducted the analysis. We partnered also with the Women's Leadership Initiative, which is a affinity group that originally started through the Coast Guard Academy, and it still is linked to the Coast Guard Academy Alumni Association, but it serves all the Coast Guard, so it's not just for alumni. And we partner with them because one of the things that we found in the Coast Guard is whenever the Coast Guard conducts a study or a survey, people don't really trust it and don't want to participate. And for this study to be successful, we really wanted it to get the numbers. We needed people to participate. And we also did a lot of focus on not only quantitative data, but also the qualitative, because oftentimes services or organizations will do exit surveys, for example, and expect people to be honest.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to the story, right? Whenever people leave, if they say, well, I'm leaving because I had a baby, which is what everybody thinks we do.
Right. We all just leave because we want to start families. Yeah. And it's like,
yes,
there's so many other factors, right?
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure we're allowed to have babies in our services. Yeah. So why did you leave? And that's that peel back the onion thing. And that's really what we wanted Rand to do was find the story and analyze that story. So we launched it with the help of WLI to get members to the focus groups. And we had people traveling 12 hours, wow, I think was the farthest to get to a focus group.
Wow.
We did them in every district, and people wanted to tell their story. Yeah. If that doesn't tell us something, right there, I don't know what does. So we had really good participation. I think we had over 1,000 people participate, and then we got the results and we made them public, which was huge because that really got the attention of Congress. It got the attention of senior leaders, of prior senior leaders, and I actually have it here, but this is our baby. So some of the findings, I mean, I don't have my notes right in front of me, but there was a few buckets that they categorized everything. Let me just find this real quick.
Well, one of the mentions was about the body composition. So I have to imagine, I mean, once you start to ask people what their thoughts are, I mean, instead of just putting it into these like survey, like pick out of those 5 options here of why you're leaving, and you actually listen to someone. It's why a listening session is so much more effective, in a focus group, so much more effective than say just a survey, although, you know, that there's an obvious role there. So I imagine that was one of the topics.
Right. And the thing with taking, for example, body composition, whenever there is the data piece of it, absolutely. But one of the things that they called out in their report is the discrimination piece. The fact that women are getting their butts taped, but the men don't have to. That's a form of unfair treatment and unequal treatment. And so just sort of like putting the words, and when they hear these stories, and putting them in words that even as women in the Coast Guard, we might not even recognize because it's just been our way of life.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of things like that. They talked about, so they kind of grouped them in different things like personal and family, and then work environment, the toxic leadership issues, the lack of birthing options on ships so that women can, get underway and get that sea time requirement required for advancement. Also different career limitations, looking at advancements, looking at promotions. And so there was a lot of different, it was wide and all encompassing what they were looking at. So yeah, so from there we made some policy changes. We probably, the biggest one is the one we'll talk, well, not one of the biggest, but the body composition.
Yeah.
And then the one we're going to talk about today is a really cool one about backfilling. And that was actually not a policy change. It was just a procedural change.
Well, and so maybe we'll talk about that. So let's talk a little bit about, so it might not have been a direct result of that study. However, the Coast Guard had a policy of a manpower surge, or kind of like a really like manpower surge for what was that manpower policy that y'all had?
So we had surge staffing. Policy was in place where if, and Morgan probably might be able to speak to this better, but it's basically whenever you need somebody to reservist to backfill for an active duty member, then you can call on surge staffing, which is located at the headquarters level, and they will backfill them. The problem is they're really about critical fill and critical need. And whenever somebody goes out on primary caregiver leave, whether it's for a baby or an adoption, they didn't view that necessarily as critical. So the way it was, so the authority existed in the sense that reservists could be called up to backfill for those people, but it would be paid for at the unit level. Which again,
so if it's a and that's what it would be a voluntary backfill. And if it's voluntary, then the unit has to pay for it. Yeah. So
and the units are poor.
Yeah.
Poor. Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of our units are only like 5 or 6 people. So they don't have money to backfill for someone for 4 months.
Right. Pay ADOS orders for somebody.
Right.
Sure.
So what the procedural change was to bring it up to the headquarters level where units can request backfill for people going on primary caregiver leave, and headquarters would be the ones to cover the cost and cover it.
Did that come, like, how did that come about? Like, so you already had that policy in place, which most services do have a similar kind of policy where if there's a certain unit is not at their critical staffing, then they can augment with reservists. I mean, there's a whole process. So it sounds like there's some similarity there, but what made you all jump to that next level to say, let's talk about primary caregiver leave here?
Can I, Patty, can I take it real quick?
Yeah.
So I really think it was the women's retention study. The procedure, like Patty was saying, was there, but the women's retention study really highlighted, and it was that qualitative part. It really highlighted that women are feeling, and not everybody, right? This isn't everybody, but a lot of women are feeling that they are stressed when they're taking maternity leave because they're hurting their unit. The unit, or this is the toxic leadership part. They're parts of the unit or members of the unit that are saying, oh, you're only getting pregnant to get out of duty, or, well, now we've got to cover all of your watch, and it's gonna be so hard for us because you're just on vacation for 3 months,
right?
And there was all this like back and forth pressure for women to take maternity leave but not really take it, like, you still need to check in, you still need to come in for stuff. You still need to come in to get weighed in, even though you're on an exemption because you just had a baby. You know, all sorts of pressure there for this leave. And so one of the SC, I think it was the SES, Mr. Rassicott, that brought it up first as an idea. And I love it because it came from a male. Like, why can we not why can we not pay for this? Like, let's just do it. This wonderful man has so many out of the box thoughts, and this one definitely caught and took. And part of it was, well, how much would this actually cost? And so we did a review of how many, it wasn't all primary caregivers. I didn't look at all primary caregivers, but it was for sure. Let's think like the longest time span. If we have a female active duty member who has convalescent leave and then continues into primary caregiver immediately, how long is that time span that they're going to be out? And then how many people is that impacting? And so for us, you know, it's 3 months, possibly 4 if they have prenatal leave on top of that. And then it worked out to be about 300 active duty members a year that for us that give birth and then go from maternity leave straight to convalescent leave. So we're looking at about 300 sets of orders for 4 months at a time.
So not that many, right? Like, so in the grand scheme of things, and there was to one of your earlier comments about, well, women just get pregnant to get out of a deployment, or sure, they'll take on a 18-year plus commitment in order to get out of a 6 to 9 month deployment or whatever the deployment is. Yeah, of course, that sounds like a really reasonable decision. That's number one. Number two, I mean, there was actually a great article that was published just a couple of months ago in the summertime, and it talked specifically about the stigma around female service members getting pregnant because there's this very common misconception that there are so many women that are always pregnant. And actually, when they ran the numbers, there are more people, there were more men that were on legal hold than there were women that got pregnant. So it was like, oh my gosh, you know, when we really talk about this stuff, like, we've really got to be very clear and stop. We've really got to break down some of these myths, because those myths really do impact culture. And that's really also, that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast so much, because to me, I just see this as an opportunity where in a culture, especially in the Marine Corps, where sometimes pregnancy is stigmatized. It is, even though it's a very natural part of life and it's very necessary. Why wouldn't we offer these kind of opportunities? Is it okay if we take a quick question? Jess has got a question for you. Jess, go for it.
Good evening, ladies. So I've worked on part of this as I worked at Headquarters Marine Corps on the Director of Marine Corps Staff front office. And one of the things is, as you know, the federal government was looking to authorize parental leave, you know, GAO ran the study and said this is like fiscally impossible. And ultimately, I wish we could say we only had 300 cases that would probably make it easier to fund, but we have an SES that actually at every turn blocks any initiative for parental leave or backfill. And so he's at the head of, you know, an organization that makes these determinations. And I just found it interesting that despite the GAO study talking about funding requirements, it was more of a leadership decision. Did you guys, did you find that the fiscal, how reasonable the money was is what actually swayed that decision? Or do you think it was this gentleman that just said, make it easy?
I think it was, first of all, good on you for raising these questions and kind of like going up against an SES on this. The thing is I think it was a little bit of the stars aligning. So there was a lot of different pieces to it. So it was a recommendation in the RAND study to use reservists to backfill. So that was one thing. So we had the data, and we had, this study. We also had an SES, which was helpful. And we also had 2 high-ranking master chiefs that were really, one's married to a Navy person, woman. I don't remember what her rank was or anything, and the other one was married to another Coast Guard master chief. So they get the women's issues, and not that you have to be married to get them, but they also had women who their wives were very very powerful in speaking and trying to make change. So I think that it was a little bit of these 2 high ranking, we had the senior leaders on the enlisted side, on the SES side, and we also had WLI, who was writing papers as an affinity group and advocating for these things, as well as data. So it was really a big collaboration, I think, that came together. And there's a point whenever I think that if you keep slapping the naysayers, and you keep slapping them and say, hey, this is what we need to do this with it, they have no choice. So, for those people that were against it, or said it's going to cost a lot of money, I can't believe we're going to do this, we would just find another person who would be an advocate, and find another person. And it was a lot of that campaigning and advocacy work that I think really put everybody over the edge. And it's an easy win. I mean, I feel like the Coast Guard, after the RAND study, they're like, we need easy wins. What can we get? What can we do for little money and big impact? So.
And Morgan, like when we spoke earlier, you even said when you looked at those numbers, it wasn't necessarily that you were replacing every single woman or every single person, so men or women who are taking that primary care leave. It was kind of those billets that were deemed necessary or operationally critical, or would have the most impact in order to backfill, correct?
So slightly different than that. We have, there are a few other policies that are in place, and then there's just a few gaps that the Coast Guard can't do that. So if for instance, you were pregnant on a ship, and we have policies in place that say you would have to be PCS'd off that ship by at 20 weeks. And so the ship then, because it warranted a PCS, the ship would get a backfill automatically. And then our aviation line, unfortunately, doesn't have reservists right now. So if a pilot were to get, or an air crewman were to get pregnant, we don't have a reservist who could come back and backfill them, because we don't have a line there for reservists that have air quals at all. So we have that mismatch right now that we have to work on. And then there's other areas where it just people might not feel they need it. It's voluntary for the unit to submit the request for it. So they do need to do that. And then it's recommended that the unit work towards finding that backfill as well. So when I was pregnant in my current unit, like my daughter's turning 1 next week, this surge staffing was in place, this backfill was in place. So we were able to find not an 05 to replace me, but we found an 04 that would come in and work with the office. And it was wonderful. I felt much less stress when I was on maternity leave for those 12 weeks. And I could maybe then kind of see the light of being home at a pandemic with my other kids coming home and kind of losing that one-on-one time I was expecting to get with my child. But I mean, I felt better. I felt less stress. I didn't feel like I had to check in all the time on my leave. And then, right now I've actually have 2 members of my staff out on caregiver leave right now. And one of them is on primary caregiver leave with a backfill. And it's such a win-win for the unit. I was actually just over at her house yesterday, delivering some food, and, she's not checking her email. She's doing great. She's bonding with her child, and she's happy. Meanwhile, we have a reservist 04 in our office that didn't really have this experience and understanding of the Coast Guard before. So he's learning so much stuff for human resources that he didn't know about before, for the way that we manage personnel plans that he wasn't aware of. And that's also helping him as he's up for promotion this year, and he wanted to have some sort of, it's like a plus up on his OER. So it's a win-win for all three of us, for the member, for the reservist, and for the unit right now.
Talk about talent management there too. I mean, now you've just given that other Coast Guardsman an opportunity to get trained on something that he might not have had that opportunity. So
Right.
yeah, that just sounds awesome. I mean, we already have these systems in place. So one of the questions that I had asked you previously was about, well, how do you pay for this? So I know that our funds look a little different than the Coast Guard's funds, but talk to me a little bit about where this gets paid from.
Right. So it used to, like Patty was saying earlier, it used to come out of unit funds if you needed to have a voluntary backfill come in. And that was, ship, whatever unit it was. If you needed a voluntary backfill, the unit had to pay for the travel, the per diem, the TDY, whatever covered it. And we rose it up to the headquarters level. So now it's out of our military pay account. So the big Coast Guard military pay account that covers everybody's, all the people. So if our military personnel aren't specifically right-sized and we have a little bit of a gap, then we cover that. We have that money that goes into other military pay areas where we can affect retention mostly, and that's like aviation bonuses and CPay, and in this case, the surge staffing backfill went into that as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, really every service, I think I'm confident enough to say that every service has some sort of pot of money where they are giving out bonuses, and not necessarily that I'm advocating that we take money away from that pot, but the money is there. It's just got to be allotted in the right way, and figure out what the services where they want to put their priorities. What was interesting for us was when we received our new commandant, who's our service chief. He was very clear about taking a look at a lot of the things that we've always done and seeing where we could do something different, not continuing the same practice just because we've always done it that way. And one of them was bonuses, and it was specifically about taking a look at those and seeing where we can get the most bang for our buck, especially when it comes to talent management, which is one of his highest priorities. The reason I also wanted to talk about this topic was because this has been one of our commandant's priorities as well, about just retention of especially female Marines, and what conditions could be set in order for women to stay on active duty longer, and like, what is it that we still have going on that might not be conducive to them being having a family, and then also being a Marine. And it was very clear that both for men and women, you will not have to choose between being a good Marine and being a good parent, which really we all applauded. So I wanted just to get this kind of topic out in front of everyone, just to at least expose them to it, that it might not be followed to a T if say, for example, our service were to adopt it, or another service were to adopt it, but at least it's a good backbone. It's a good skeleton for what we could do. So I love that. Are there any other points that I might be missing there about the manpower surge? Again, I just have to think that it has such a positive impact on culture, and it takes away, doesn't probably eliminate, but it certainly does reduce that kind of stigma that's associated with pregnancy.
It's still fairly new. It's only been around for about a year and a half, 2 years now, but I think that it's overwhelmingly positive, and I haven't heard anyone say anything negative about it. Yeah. Patty, what's your experience?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that it's doing is like we talked about with the stigma. When a woman shows up at the unit, people aren't like, oh, she's just going to get pregnant. And then I have to do her job. I think that's probably one of the biggest impacts, is that the work's going to get covered, and we support you. So it's so funny how something so simple as just moving, grabbing from a different pot of money, so to speak, can change culture.
Yeah.
And I really believe it will start to change the culture. The other thing it'll do too is it'll help with men that are taking primary caregiver leave. That they're, I mean, I imagine, you know, at most units, it still is, oh, you're going to take how many weeks? Like dads don't do that, you know, especially, you know, maybe in another country, but not here. So I think that's the other piece. And something I always thought about whenever in the back of my brain as gender policy advisor is, even though these are raised as women's issues initially, they're workforce issues. And like the biggest example is sexual assault. So women really sort of raised the issue of sexual assault, but sexual assault has been going on since the military began.
Yeah.
And we are just the ones that brought it to the forefront and are trying to tackle it. So we have to keep that in the back of our brains, right? Like all of us, I mean, everybody does that, you know, these are workforce issues. And by solving this issue and coming up with creative solutions, we're helping the entire workforce, which is so cool. So now we're saying, men, you can stay home and be a dad for your primary caregiver leave. How cool is that?
What a great point. That's such a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. One of the other things that I don't know if this was a direct result of the women's retention study, but it was definitely a topic that we talked about was the program that you all have in place called the Temp Set program. So I was hoping we could talk about that because it's going to sound very familiar to a lot of people, especially on the Marine side, as like we call it like the pilot leave program or something along those lines, where you can take a year off or up to 2 years off, and then but there's a 2-to-1 payback. So for every year you take off, you have a 2-year payback. So oftentimes, or it's a 3-year payback. I can't remember now off the top of my head. But I know a lot of Marines have said, well, I'm not going to do that because now I just owe even more time and it's not really what I'm looking for. So can you talk a little bit about your Temp Set program?
Go ahead, Patty, you take it.
Okay. So the Temp Set program, it stands for temporary separation. And I'll compare it to what I think you guys call it the SIP, right? The Career Intermission Program. Okay, so which I actually think is a really cool program for certain people, as well as the Temp Set program is really cool for certain people. So the Temp Set program, you do not get that 1/30th of your pay like you do with SIP. You also don't get health care, which I think is kind of significant. I mean, I'm not saying that they need it during Temp Set, but for those people going out on caregiver leave or baby leave, I actually like the SIP program so that they can still maintain their health care. But that's just a very quick comparison between the two. You can go for up to 2 years on Temp Set, but it can be for any reason. The Coast Guard doesn't really care. It started out being just for the care of newborn children, but that's no longer the case. They opened it up so that you can, like Morgan said, like just test the waters, like see if I can make it in the real world. Or if you want to do something that you can't do while you're in the service, like go to yoga school in Costa Rica or something for a year. You can take a year and do it, and you can come right back in. While you're out, and I might get this wrong, you're in the IRR?
That's correct.
You can do any of those. You could do IRR, ISL, right?
So it's like the IRR or the CELRES. If you're naturally put into the IRR, you can be put into the CELRES if you want to, and then you're tracked that way right now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so up to 2 years, you do have to time it, and there are a lot of exceptions of people like that cannot. Those that can take it, it is a great opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's not very much utilized at all. A lot of people don't partake in it, and those that do, they don't come back. The Coast Guard, many don't come back, I should say. The Coast Guard once said, well, we only get, I don't even know the numbers, a certain percentage to return. That's bad. And I thought, well, is it bad or is it good that we otherwise they might have left completely from the Coast Guard
Yeah.
and not returned. So that losing talent is an issue. However, one of the things the RAND study showed was an easy fix is just to make contact with these members while they're out on their down in Costa Rica. You know, having that good contact information, touching base with them, letting them know about timelines, because to come back in, they have to meet with their detailer, put in their dream sheet, and get all that set up well in advance of coming back. So there's certain like timelines that they have to make sure they meet while they're out to make sure that their career is still on track when they come back.
Yeah.
But a simple thing that came out of the study was people don't know how to come back in. And that's very easily fixed. And since then, the Coast Guard has come up with some temp step guides. And I believe they have a dedicated counselor on both the enlisted and the officer side to touch base with those members. So hopefully our numbers will get better and more people will return.
Yeah. Because essentially what it is like you said, you can go and kind of test the waters. You can go and see if hey, I'd really like to see if I could be, you know, my civilian equivalent and do that job. And if I might like it, I might like just a different change of pace. But there's an easier on ramp. And I think that that's often that, at least when we talked about it, that was very appealing to me because oftentimes if somebody gets out, for example, in the Marine Corps, if we get out and even transition to the reserves, you have to go through an entire board. If you want to come back on active duty, you go through a return to active duty package, then it goes through a board, and that's, I think, about once a year, maybe twice a year, but you have to get selected. So this is actually a program that's in place that is easy on ramp, easy off ramp, which I think is really cool.
I love it because like I did not use it, but I thought about it, right? And I love it because I wanted to be able, just having that opportunity to even consider whether I needed it or not was good for me. You know, when I got pregnant, do I stay in the Coast Guard or do I get out of the Coast Guard? And maybe the result of that pregnancy would have been so significant that it would have changed my entire concept of how life was going to be, where I didn't want to work anymore and I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Or, you know, especially after my first child where everything changed and I didn't know what having a newborn was compared to a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. So being able to have the opportunity to know that, oh, I could go through this major life change and then still come back to the Coast Guard, and meet professional goals that I have for myself was amazing. And like Patty said, there aren't a lot of people that use it. And for sure, probably 75% or so stay out and then the 25% come back. But we are talking, you know, single digits here. And it's not that it's utilized so much, it's more that the opportunity is there. And if you need it, you can do it. And so the people that I know that took it and came back, you know, some of them are for care of newborn children. Some of them were for like sailing around the world. Like her and her spouse bought a sailboat and they sailed around the world for 2 years. Some of them went and got a special education teaching degree and taught and came back. So there's all sorts of different reasons to take it. It's just wonderful that it's available.
Right.
That's
right. And just having that option. And sometimes it's flexibility and just like you said, just the option of flexibility sometimes means a lot more, you know, than actually just being in this kind of rigid box. Plus too, I mean, there's just this fear of the unknown oftentimes. And so sometimes people don't necessarily take that leap, because they don't know, hey, I still really like what I'm doing. I just wonder what it's like to do something else. And then before it's too late, before they're too old to really do something like that. So that's really awesome. And there's no, just to confirm, there is no, like, if you take 1 year off, there's no 2-year payback. No, it's just coming right back in, which is great. I'm looking at my notes from the last time, but, oh, Jess, you have a question. Go for it.
Sorry. I know that is often leadership's concern about promotion rates after using special programs like that. It's not necessarily the service members' primary concern. Have they studied that on long-term impacts to promotion and selection
You're asking the right person. That's what my office does. So there are not a lot of people that take this program. So when we look at members who take it, if you were looking at promotion rates specific to officers, we are talking 3 or 4 people a year that would come back into the Coast Guard, and to consider coming up with some sort of reason that says temp sep is an actual, like, the leading variable in promotion selection. There's just not enough data to support that. However, I will say, of the people that I know that came back on temp sep, they have all been promoted, all of them, and are continuing to succeed. So it's they're high performers. On the enlisted side, we have advancements, and they also have advancements they have to meet within certain time periods, or they're up for higher tenure. And higher tenure is a method of allowing for advancement, allowing for flow through the enlisted system. So if people, E8s or E9s are sitting in the Coast Guard at that particular rating for 10, 15 years, we're not able to advance members. And so the higher tenure allows for that flow by taking people who have maybe become stagnant at their current rank, and telling them, keep working towards advancement, keep working towards moving forward. And if they're not doing that, then it's a method for allowing that flow for new people to come into that system. So in that regard, if a member were to come up to higher tenure and they had previously been on temp sep, then they are allowed to put in their memo to the board, any extenuating circumstances that they might have. And that's where this connection with the reserves come in, because if you're connected to the reserves, then you are still maintaining your time in service. So enlisted, it might have a more detrimental impact on enlisted members because their time in service clock is still ticking, right? It's not paused because they're connected to the reserves. So if they were to move to higher tenure, then we would want to make sure, like, their command should definitely counsel them to put a memo forward saying, hey, I spent 2 years on temporary separation, and request a waiver to be able to make that next service-wide exam to be able to advance.
I want to chime in on this one because I feel differently than Morgan, which is cool that we all have our opinions. So I was actually tasked when I was gender policy to find a person who had a positive experience with temp sep. And they wanted to do a story about her to be able to promote the program and market it. And I was given, like, I don't know, 2 days to find somebody. And it was like finding a needle in the haystack. I got the list of people that took temp sep, and it was not very positive. I did find one person, and mostly it was surrounding promotion. So the promotion stuff just sort of got messed up, for lack of a better term, whether they came back at a half year point, or they just got passed over. So the people I know that took it, I think a couple of them did get promoted, but it was 3 years later. Then 3 years, in other words, than their classmates, type of their running mates that they originally had. So I did, the people I know that took it, they did not. And they also felt like once they put in their letter to leave, it was, they were looked down upon and possibly impacted their evaluation. And these were high performers too. And the thing is, with the temp sep program, which I think it needs to be really looked at to be changed, or for these changes, is I think it's just a simple policy thing where the eligibility requirements for it are very interesting. You have to be this and you have to be that and not this and not this. And there's I'll show you, it's just a long list of like who's not eligible. So these are the people not eligible. And one of the first things I would do is, you're not allowed to if you're retirement eligible, you're not allowed to take it, which I think is the absolute wrong way to look at it. When you get more senior in rank, that's absolutely when you need it. I left the Coast Guard at 20 years because I was done. I needed a break. If I would have gotten the ability to take a 2-year temp step, I might have actually gone back. I still love the Coast Guard, but I was exhausted. I mean, 20 years of getting your butt kicked, you know, by all this stuff. I needed a break. So it's things like that that I think, you know, are their tour complete. But if they're on a 4-year tour, then that might mean they're, you know, they have to wait 3 more years before they can take it. So, but then you have the person sitting beside you who's on a 2-year tour. So there's a lot of things to it that I think if they really manage, if they change the policy slightly, you might be having more success from it because of the impacts of those. So
that's such a great point, because I think oftentimes there might be okay, we heard you, we enacted this policy change, and then when no one uses it because we didn't get all the details right, they're like, see, we told you it wouldn't work. And it's like, okay, wait, that was the first, this should be iterative. Like, this should not just be, you know, concrete right from the very beginning. Like, let's take another bite at the apple here. We can get better. We would never, you know, we never look at anything and just do it one time like that. It's, yeah. What a great point, because I know that, you know, right now I'm exhausted, and it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I got a couple more years before I retire. But just to be able to take that break might be kind of nice, just to sort of refresh. I think I know I would come back as a better leader. I would just look at things differently because I would have a different perspective. Yeah, great point. I think there might have been a question too, Kelly. I don't know if you still have a question to ask.
Sure, thanks. Patty, I was curious, were they specifically looking for a woman who used TempStep for maternity leave, or did they care? Because, you know, and it's hard when you have the handful of people that you're thinking about. Because I have a friend who was a pilot, and he left and he had these grand ideas of what he was going to do, and then realized that oh, those are pipe dreams. And he came back into the Coast Guard, and he was the happiest person back in the Coast Guard. But I'm just curious, were they specifically looking for the female example so that they, you know, had that poster child, or were they just looking for a general success story?
Great question.
Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe the tasker was find a female woman, or sorry, obviously a woman who had a positive experience with TempStep. Is that right?
Yeah. I think they were looking for that, like Kelly said, in our own words, the poster child to say, yep, this is why this is beneficial to women. This is what we need. So they targeted women.
Yeah. Well,
but not necessarily for babies. Like, they didn't have to have a baby. Yeah.
Right.
Because to your earlier point, Patty, it's like, we're just bringing these topics to the forefront. It's really for everybody. You know, there really could be that great, like Kelly just said, there's this dude that really wanted to go out and try something else, and then realized, no, he really wanted to come back. So
yeah, it's so interesting because oftentimes I think our male leaders need the male perspective to give validation to these things that are good for everybody, but really good for women. And so it just seems like a missed opportunity. But anyway, go ahead.
Great point.
That's a really good point, Kelly, about having the male example to be able to explain what it does. And that's a really, thank you for that little nugget. That's a really good point. That it's much more relatable to the majority that way. Yeah.
Well, also too, I mean, think about what that opens up, because sometimes, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but somebody will go, well, isn't that just for the girls? It's like, no, this is for literally everyone. We're trying to make this better. So it's not just for the women, it's for the men. I mean, that's what equal opportunity is really all about. It's for everybody. Yeah.
And that's why I like that, you know, the kind of the basis of what we were talking about today, the surge staffing, because the whole time was changed over to primary caregiver and secondary caregiver, right? So the concept of maternity and paternity leave was removed, and then primary caregiver and secondary caregiver was, you know, put in there. And the surge staffing backfill is not about maternity time, and it's not about convalescent. It's about primary caregiver leave to exceed 41 days. So 42 days or more, and and it's about having a newborn baby at home, and it's about adoption. So and I love that it's about those two things, right? And because there's definitely some room for improvement on adopting newborns at home, and it's great, right? Because it can be men, it can be women. It's to help the family.
Yeah, right. And that's really the emphasis, the family. So I know that there have been a lot of women have advocated, and actually men too, to make the caregiver just caregiver leave, not primary or secondary, because sure, while there's that 6-week convalescent leave for the birth parent to recover, really what they're saying is like, let's not place an emphasis on the woman or the man, or one person being more important in that child's life more. Like, let's talk about being able to bond that family. And I mean, it's just been totally turned upside down by adding a new member. So how can they start to build that bond? Yeah, I we'll get there, hopefully, hopefully soon. Hopefully soon. One of the other discussions that we had was, and this was just all kind of like in our roundabout discussion about things that the Coast Guard does. But one of the things that was really interesting to me too was one of the initiatives that you all put forward about women that are going through, and men that are going through fertility treatments, and how that might impact the current policies, and how you're trying to stay in line with the current Coast Guard parenting guidelines, but also how that impacts your weight, how it impacts, perhaps your ability to do your job, your medical status, things like that. Do y'all want to talk about that?
Patty, I think you should start, because you were like the forefront of getting this put through for the Coast Guard.
Okay. So fertility treatments, how I got involved with that initially was I was approached about the weight standards, primarily. Well, actually, I was approached about a lot of different issues with it, such as, you mentioned a few weight standards, the fact that women are sometimes transferred or go TDY in the middle of treatments, and that can have a huge impact on their treatments. The TRICARE issue of not covering it. So there's a lot there. So the way I operated or tried to figure out is, how do I navigate the system that has never really heard of the fertility issue in great detail. So the approach was, let's start out with a small piece of the big, all of these issues. Let's just take one small one. And the first one we started with was the weight abeyance that we eventually approved for those members who are going through fertility treatments. And when I say members, it's men and women again. So one of the things I discovered was the same medication that is used for women is used for men to help with fertility, that in this specific medication causes significant weight gain in a very rapid way. So, and it's important for the members to not be dieting and not be going crazy to try to lose this weight, because that's what the medication does, in addition to its real medical use. But so it took me a long time to do all this research, because there just weren't subject matter experts on it. I did find one doctor at PSC who was amazing, and he was very knowledgeable on it because his daughter was actually an OBGYN. And I think she worked with a lot of fertility, other doctors. She might have herself as well. But so he would bounce ideas off of her. And he's the one that got me educated on all of the weight gain, so that we could really put some numbers in there and quantify it. So that's what we did. We routed it up, but it was amazing how it was, to me, how difficult it was to get a policy through that really had zero impact. I mean, when you look at the population, it's such a small population. It's 0% out of our huge population. So it really bothered me, because it's like, this is going to save a member, but there's no cost associated. I'm not asking for you to pay for the treatments. I'm just asking you for weight abeyance so that they can go through the treatments.
What is weight abeyance? Can you?
Oh, a weight abeyance is given to members who have a medical condition that is causing them to gain weight outside of their control.
Okay.
So you might get one for a short time for, say, a thyroid issue. No, not thyroid. That's not a good example. Oh, I used to.
Well, that is one, but also, so for hypothyroidism, you get one. So for
a short time.
For a short time until your
until you get
medicine
your
kicks in.
medication. Yeah.
PCOS, smoking cessation, and then pregnancy, right, is one as well. So
So it's essentially just, you're not, the Coast Guard is not weighing you in and holding you to the strict body composition standards while you're going through a certain medical treatment or other, or results of the medical treatment. Okay.
right.
Got it.
Yeah, and you could, you have to be, like, there's certain rules, like you have to be within standard before you apply for it and things like that. So they added to that list of things you can get an abeyance for. And it's a medical thing. So the medical officer will approve, at the Personnel Service Center is actually the one person who approves those. So it's not at the command level, which is good. So, so we added IVF as one of those issues, but the other thing that still is out there is the cost, is the location. We had one member who was doing her shots in a porta-john while she was doing inspections of ships. So just having the, you know, the awareness that this member actually was, it showed up in her evaluation that, you know, she was taking too much time for medical, and so it turned into a much larger case, but that's the, and she was out of weight standards. So we lost members, over a couple members here and there, because they simply wanted to have a family.
Yeah.
So I remember when we were fighting to get this policy put in place, Pat, I was going through IVF, and I've always, ever since I started in the Coast Guard when I was 17, I was at like the top of the weight standard for my height. And that hasn't changed, 20 years now. And I'm still
it's
there.
also based on a standard from the 1830s. So you should give yourself, show yourself a little mercy.
Yeah. So my 17-year-old self was still at that max. And I continue to be there. But we were fighting for this. My second child, I was pregnant on my ship. And my command was fully aware of this, and I was the operations officer. We were moving through, we were doing, our training exercises, we were doing counter drug missions, and I think I did a fantastic job at doing that. And up until the 20-week mark, right, where I had to leave, but that was nicely timed as appropriate, because I was allowed by policy to be on the ship up until 20 weeks. And then you had to get off, but I was at my PCS time anyways. So it worked out really well for that second child. Now, wanting to have a third child, I also attempted to time that pregnancy and couldn't. I was diagnosed with secondary infertility, and we could not get pregnant. And so then it's like, well, what do we do? And so we try and get IVF. And I'm at that point, one of the major bases that we have out in Alameda, where we have a ton of tenant commands, and Patty had asked, like, do you know anybody else who's going through this? Because we have nobody at headquarters that we can understand. And, thankfully in California, it's a very, open, atmosphere out there. And so it's like, yes, here are 15 cases right here in base Alameda that are active duty members, where either like the active duty members going through it or their spouses going through it. And by the way, like, I've got probably 60 more people that I know just in my neighborhood that were going through it. and we all use this, like this center. Oh, and by the way, there are these 5 DoD military treatment facilities that support it, fund it, give you a discount, and do medical for it. So all of that information was going through, but at the same time, I'm trying. I was again now up for rotation, and I should have been looking for command afloat, but I was pregnant now because IVF worked. But then lost, but then miscarriage. So now having 6 miscarriages, 5 surgeries on my uterus, 7 babies up in heaven. There's, because there were multiples in there, and then having miscarriages where I went in for a DNC one day, and I was literally on a plane to Japan the next day. And I had that twice, and having to get notes from my doctor that I was taking needles overseas so that I could do my own shots right in Singapore. It was tremendously stressful to be able to do that, and having that stress of I'm just trying to have a child and I can't, and there's all this medical, and now I've gained 5 pounds. And I'm overweight and I can't just lose it. That was hard. And luckily Patty was there to fight this fight for me. And anybody else who is going through this same stress, because IVF is stressful for families. It's a different kind of stress than, because you just don't know when it's going to work, and you think it's going to work and it doesn't. And it's like loss after loss after loss until you get that miracle baby. And hopefully you do, so it was massive thanks to Patty for getting that through. And to Russ Meyer, who is over in CG13 helping with it, and like our policy shop. And it's just been a tremendous help for members. And I think there's still work to do for that, because things like when you're going through the egg retrieval process, you're so bloated at that time period, and you really actually will induce a ton of medical harm if you do any sort of exercise, because you could twist your ovaries during that time period. That you really don't want to be taking a PFT at that time period. It's very dangerous if you do that. And so those 10 to 15 day span, you really want to make sure that's not happening. And we don't have any policy in place to protect those members right now. So, the Coast Guard still has a ways to go on some of these areas, but we are making really great strides. And I think that this one was just amazingly helpful for a lot of women who are overwhelmingly stressed about not being able to just have a child by themselves. And also the men, who are going through it and having a hard time with that as well.
Yeah, we're actually going to schedule a podcast with one of our Marines who did her master's thesis on IVF and just some of the fertility options that service members have. But what was really interesting, so we're going to talk about this in even more detail here in the near future. But what was really interesting to me when we had this earlier discussion was I just hadn't thought of it this way. These service members are paying out of pocket, and it's not like a couple $100. It's thousands. It's
$50,000 for me.
Yeah. $50,000. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars that these service members are doing, and obviously with any kind of, or they're spending. And obviously with any kind of medical condition, you want to be transparent with your command and just let them know, like, look, this is what's going on. This is what we're trying to do. It kind of sounds crazy that you have to be that you have to allow certain people kind of into that personal part of your life, because it's really very vulnerable. And thank you for Morgan for sharing. But when it really comes down to it, if we're kind of disrupting that, like you're getting on a plane the next day, if they're constantly in this state of stress, if they're not given the allowances to maybe not do a PFT at that certain time. I'm not saying that we make all of these concessions. I'm not saying that we have to make all these individual concessions all the time. However, if we want diversity and inclusion. If we want women to stay on active duty, we have to start looking at this. It's a people person, it's a people organization, the DoD, and you have to make sure that your people are happy and ready. I mean, use happy in air quotes, of course, but my gosh, like this was just so eye-opening to me, and just all of the impacts. So not just financial, so now that's their personal financial contribution, but also the impacts to their health, both men and women, and the impacts to their weight, impacts to just even their well-being, because Morgan, I'm just so sorry to hear that you had lost, so many babies, and think about that emotional toll that goes on both the man and the woman. My gosh, or the couple, the couple. So it looks like and somebody's making some comments in here too about talking about even breast milk shipping and TD and TAD, TDY deferment. These are all things that the DoD has to start to come to grips with. I mean, if we're going to send women TAD while they're breastfeeding, which we know we discussed in one of our previous podcasts, we know that 12 months is really that ideal time frame. If we're going to do that, if we're going to still use them in that capacity, then let's put an allowance in there for them to be able to ship their breast milk back. That's kind of the least we could do. Any other comments or questions or anything that we might have missed before we wrap it up? Any questions from the crowd? Go ahead, Patty.
Yeah, I just have one thing to say, and I think Kristen kind of reminded me of this in the chat. And I don't know if this is what she meant, but I just had a thought is, I love this podcast because I think, the education that can come from it, I didn't know about IVF issues. I personally hadn't gone through them. My sister, who's prior Air Force, she has. And it's one of these things where, what do we don't know what we don't know. So, going after commands or going after leadership when they just don't know, and we need to educate, that's really key to be able to get this done, is a benefit of the doubt that people are well-intended. And I always used to say when I was on active duty is there's three sets of people. There's the top 33 that get it. They understand it. They're good to go. The middle third are like, they're harmless, but they might not be aware of everything.
Yeah.
And then the bottom third are like, yeah, no, I'm not doing anything for you. Like this, I'm not. We don't need to focus on changing their minds on the bottom third. It's this middle part that's really, 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 we can really impact. And it's through podcasts like this that gets them like curious and maybe even move up into the top third where they want to actually do something and take action. So I really appreciate what you're doing. And I think it goes a long way.
Great. Thank you. And actually some of the feedback that we've received, thank you for saying that, some of the feedback we've received has actually been mostly from men. So male Marines, after the last discussion we had, which was about breastfeeding considerations, one of my brothers just sends me a note and he said, hey, I made sure that we had a lactation room now in our building. And he's like, I moved a bunch of stuff out and I made this room. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so fantastic. I even had a male commander say, there are 2 female Marines that were recommended for separation due to body composition. And he said, absolutely not. After he saw our brief, heard our podcast, and really took a good look at what these Marines were going through, and saw how hard that they were working to try to meet the standards. And he's just like, nope. He's like, these Marines are good to go. So we're having an impact in talent management. And so I hope people share these with their brothers, because men really can be our biggest advocates here. And Patty, yeah, to your point, that top third, those oftentimes are our greatest advocates. But we need that middle group there to help us out too. And it's just education. It's just education. Because even too, I mean, as women, I don't know everything either. This is always so eye-opening for me. So thank you. Questions from anyone from the group before we get going? Okay, nothing hurts. So ladies, thank you again. I mean, I really have loved this conversation. I've loved getting to know you. You're always welcome anytime. And we're just so happy to have start bridging the gap with the Coast Guard. So looking to build the bonds and build the bridges with the other services too, because we're really here for greater good DoD change. So ladies, thank you again, and signing off.
Thank you. Bye.